Needs are universal, products are not. We build products to solve a need, not product for product's sake. What does a product manager do? We identify a basic human need and we design some product, whether physical or virtual, to satisfy that need.
Computer science has all kind of formal programs, both 4-year program and 1-year master's
Correct.
program and so on. AI has all the programs,
Right.
but all of those people have to work with product manager. People like you and me.
Yes.
Why do we have to figure it out on our own? On the job.
Every product should have form and function. The reason we love the iPhone is because it's beautifully made, but we would not love it as much if it was not as functional along with the beauty. We are no longer the owners of the product, right? We are concierges or we are caretakers of that product. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication in product building. In many product reviews, if I thought that the product was getting very complex and people propose new features, I would always say, great, I'll let you have this feature, but tell me which other feature you're going to take out.
Yeah. Deep, welcome.
Thank you.
I was, just in preparation for this, I was going through the lecture notes that we recently published around product management. I started out in product management. It was almost 20 years ago. I wish, I had a resource like this available. I was able to relate to a lot of things, and I was thinking some other things, maybe, even though I've done product management all this while, maybe I don't know some aspect of product management as well as you've articulated. So what prompted you to, put together this, outstanding resource? I think it's a must read for every product manager. But love to know your thought process. How did you came to you've been a VC for a while? What prompted you to create this whole resource for product?
Yeah, no, but it's exactly what you were saying. And thank you for inviting me on your podcast. It's great to be here. But it's exactly what you were saying. I started out doing products 25 years ago myself. And, as you and I both probably discovered, it's an apprenticeship business, right? There is no book. There are no classes being taught on product management. And you just gain this knowledge, and hopefully over time it becomes insights and wisdom. And I felt like, I've had the opportunity to hire and train and work with and learn from hundreds, if not thousands of product managers now, and some extremely outstanding ones, and some that have worked with me have gone on to do lots of amazing things. And I felt like, rather than every new generation just learning by apprenticeship, maybe we can package some of these insights. So actually, I started out by creating a class that I taught on product management at Stanford for several years. And then, the class cannot really scale because we could only have 30 students in our class, just given it was a very interactive class and we did all the work of grading, etc. ourselves. So we decided that, maybe writing it would help it reach more people. And that was the genesis. And it took a while to write, by the way. Just, there are 9 essays so far on my website, deepnishar.com. We've published about 6 of them as of today, and we'll publish the remaining 9. But to write those 9 took us close to a year.
And you mentioned those 17 different product experts you guys interviewed in depth.
Correct.
And were you able to see a lot of commonality? Are there diverging viewpoints about various aspects of product management, or general principles seems to emerge, and most product practitioners seem to talk about similar things?
There are some commonalities and many differences. And, this is why I call it an apprenticeship business, because there's no one set way of doing it. There are many paths to scaling that same summit and getting to success. For example, the one essay that's already we published on technical debt actually demonstrates the breadth of thinking and the depth of understanding that now practitioners have of this space. When you and I perhaps were in our journeys of building products, it was always a bad word, right? Everyone would say, oh, you cannot have technical debt, just write very good code and so on. And as we started talking to other practitioners, one thing became very apparent, which is this is not one of those things you avoid. It's one of the things you manage. It's almost like stress in your life. Everyone says you should not have stress. That's impossible. Because we are human beings. We'll have thoughts and we'll have, ups and downs in our life. We'll always have stress. So we have to learn how to manage it. Similarly, in a smaller context, technical debt, if you write code, will always happen. And you have to learn how to manage it. So that was a good example of getting those breadth of experiences,
how
captured.
does one design this apprenticeship path? Because I mean, if let's say maybe in my early days, if I was able to apprentice with you, then I learned Deep's way of building product. At some point you mentioned Shishir. He was my boss in one of the startups I worked for, and he had very strong viewpoints about product, and I've been in touch with him. But if let's someone who's just starting out as an early product manager, how can they create their own apprenticeship? Because it will probably take many years and many cycles to really understand the art and science of product management
Correct.
in a particular way.
Yeah, and it is luck dependent, right? Like you were fortunate, you got to work with Sashir early on. I presume it was at Centrata,
That's right.
right? I was very fortunate. I started my product journey first at Cummins Engines, which is like a really well-run organization. Then I started my own company, and I was able to learn by doing and learn by making mistakes. But then I got to Google, and Google, has the famous APM program that had been designed by my colleague Marissa Meyer at that time. And so you could see what world class looked like. And I have perhaps a little bit more curiosity than the average person. So I observe a lot, and I try to take the best of what I see and try to deploy it in my own work and see how that works for me. So it's a little bit of a experimental way of learning by doing. One of the ways I have tried to operationalize that for folks who worked on my teams is for the best people or people with the highest potential, I always try to rotate them. So never let them, be. And this is contrarian thinking in a way, right? Because when you have great people on your team, you want to keep them because you're like, hey, we work well together, we can leverage each other, we can do great things together. But for their development, they need to see other ways of doing, and they can then assimilate and become even better than the people around them. And so we would make that a programmatic approach, and every 18 or 24 months the highest rated people had to be rotated to a different manager and work with a
The
different
Google
team.
APM program.
No, this is something I instituted actually when I was at LinkedIn.
Okay.
And usually people give up folks from their teams who are not doing very well, and we made people give up people who were doing very well, who were their best performers.
Wow.
For the development of that best performer.
Got it. And did it require some persuasion or some incentive creation? Like, how do you culturally incorporate? Because it is difficult to hire good people. You spend 2 years with them, you train them, and finally they start to perform.
Right.
And then Deep comes in saying, "Okay, great, you produce a A+ performers. Time to give this person to another team." How do you?
Well, you get the others too.
You get the others
right?
too.
So
right.
it's not. When managers exchange poor performers, it's called a lemon exchange. But I think when you exchange great performers, I would call it a mango exchange. Alfonso mangoes, the best of the fruit that you should share with each other.
Right. Okay, so a lot of people, I think startups can think about creating mango Alfonso exchange culture in the organization, and then that way you go around. And I think you mentioned in the notes also, I was reading that the collaboration tendency goes up because you have the context of other team, you are bringing the context with you, now other context, and you have friends on the other side, as opposed to
exactly.
You don't want to share resources, knowledge with other team because you want to ship our thing faster, right? So that way the spirit of collaboration will really go up over people.
Correct. And you're exactly right. And also, as we know, working as product managers, we have the most responsibilities for shipping, but we have to do it all by influence. Engineers don't work for product managers. Designers usually don't work for product managers. Data scientists don't work for product managers, but then we are responsible for all of their work. And so that spirit of collaboration has to really be inculcated.
So I want to ask you, look, the startups have gotten all the attention over the last 20, 30 years, both in India and US. Startups in many ways are really driving the world. Incredible amount of money keeps coming in and in. You are investing, huge dollars last 10 years into space. And product management in many ways is the heart of it. You have no startup without a product, and you don't have a product without a product manager.
Correct.
Why isn't product management a more rigorous science? Like, there is no master's degree in product management, at least not to the best of my knowledge. You have taken on the mantle of teaching, product management, as you were lecturing at Stanford, and now you've written this course and, actively doing work. But why hasn't, is this something people still believe is not something which is not formally teachable? It's not at the level of, I don't know, algorithms or other things you can do master in computer science for. Why not for product management?
So that's a great question. And, my colleague and my erstwhile teacher from Harvard Business School, Tom Eisenman, and I have talked about this quite a bit. And part of it is probably because this is not like a 4-year full length program as such, right? So it can be taught within a semester, and maybe you have 2 or 3 semesters worth of it. The challenge is always that it's not just an academic thing. So to teach it well, you need practitioners to come in and teach it, and then practitioners get very busy. So I think that's part of the
But we
hurdle.
still think like, computer science has all kind of, formal programs, both 4-year program and 1-year, master's
Correct.
program and so on. AI has all the programs, data sciences have.
Right.
But all of those people have to work with product manager, people like you and me.
Yes.
Why do we have to figure it out on our own, on the job?
No, you're right. I think some thought needs to be given to it. Michael Deering, who was probably one of the earliest really well-known heads of product in the Valley, he used to run a 3-month program for product managers, and it was always like very full. I think he's since discontinued because, again, it's a lot of effort to be teaching it. So when I taught the class at Stanford, it wasn't lectures. So we would do a 3-hour class every week. The first hour would be discussing the topic to be taught. The second hour was we would bring in other practitioners to talk and make it an interactive session. The third hour was doing what the students had learned. So that is pretty intense, both on the part of the students, because they have to put in a lot of effort, and on the part of the teachers, because we had to assemble all the right people and make it worthwhile for everyone to be there. So to try and replicate that semester after semester and do it, that's a labor of love, really.
So you did it for 4 or 5 years?
For 3 years.
For 3 years, and every one semester a year or 2 semesters?
One quarter a year.
1 quarter a year. Okay, got it. And are there any some really well-known product managers or entrepreneurs who came out of those that labor of love?
This was very recent, so a lot of them are doing extremely well. Many of them went on to start companies, and I hear from them from time to time, which is always gratifying. I think that's one of the most gratifying things as a teacher, is when you hear back from your students and they say, that one thing we discussed that really changed the direction of what I'm doing, or the way I'm thinking about starting my company, etc.
When did you realize that you want to teach product management? I'm guessing Google APM program might have had something to do with it, because in some ways that's an in-house apprenticeship model, right? So have you been teaching about product management since that long, or at what time you realize that I've learned enough about product management so I can have a discussion with people who are just starting out in their product management journey and teach them the fundamentals?
So I built the class in the 2014-2015 timeframe, so post my journey at Google as well as post my journey at LinkedIn. So it took me a while to get there, to feel that I knew enough to be dangerous, but also knew, not as much that I felt I knew everything, and I wanted to learn. And that's the other part of teaching, which is, it's incredibly clarifying, because you don't know what questions you're going to get. So you learn the subject in a very new light, and you learn a lot more about it. So it was as much for me and to deepen my understanding of the subject matter, which I love. Like, I really love building products. I think about products all the time. Every time I see something, I was just using the washroom here and I saw that spinning thing. And, immediately I was like, okay, I've never seen this before. Who thought about it? Why is it here? Why is it built the way it is? And so my brain just works in that direction. So for me, it was truly a labor of love. And I hope it was very, helpful and valuable to at least some of the students.
I'm going to remind you of one anecdote. You may or may not remember it, So there was a Tiger Global organized this internet conference, I think 2013-14.
Right.
And at that time, me and a lot of us, look up to you as this, product management guru out of Silicon Valley, and something you can learn from. You're on stage, and this Mandarin Oriental, they have these jugs with the handle attached at the bottom, so there is no leverage. And you pulled it up and you showed on the stage. And I was at a conference at Mandarin Oriental just 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
And I saw exact same jug in the room. And I was saying, Deep was talking about this bad product design 10 years ago, but clearly was listening. They're still using the same jug. It's very painful to lift to apply extra force, right? And that's the example of just very poorly designed product which will who knows, will continue for decades, I guess.
Correct, because every product should have form and function. Right. The reason we love the iPhone is because it's beautifully made, but we would not love it as much if it was not as functional along with the beauty that it has. And it's incredibly difficult to get both the form and function of a product correct.
Yeah. So one of the things, I have used in my product management journey, you tell me like whether you approve it or not, is I would treat myself as the ultimate consumer.
Right.
If I love the product, I think it's good, most likely many other people like, because I am not a unique. Is that a good way to look at products versus, outside in, where you're putting in, hand of consumers, observing, collecting all the data, which at some point you need to do. But at least, my go-to framework is, first of all, I need to be wowed with the product I'm building. And then hopefully many other people like it as well. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But at least that's my starting point.
So it's a controversial topic.
Yeah.
And this is one where there's a lot of divergence of opinions. Yeah. So I'm glad you brought it up, because you hear these stories a lot, right? It's like, the Airbnb founders, they wanted to stay with some friends, and they were like, wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to stay in a hotel room and I could stay with somebody else? That's how Airbnb was formed. Or Dropbox, like Drew was, traveling back and forth, needed to share files with his co-founder, and then decided to build that, and so on. And I think those are, great founder stories, and those are universal needs.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I feel like it can be incredibly arrogant as a founder to believe that somehow our needs embody the needs of the vast majority of, users and consumers out there.
Right.
So my belief and my training suggests that walking in the customer's shoes is probably the best way to think about what is needed in that product. Like, I can't tell you, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, when we do user research, right, for a new product, we do it through the one-way glass.
Right.
And you're sitting there and you're watching. So how do we do the research? We build something, we mock it up, or we have a functional prototype, and we gave a set of tasks, right, to the person who's come in for the user research study. And they have to accomplish that using the product.
Right.
And then, we see them struggling, or we see them like doing the wrong, right, in quotation marks, things. And you're like, oh my God, like, why can't they get it? It's like right there. And that is the fallacy, right? We believe we had the right answer. Anytime, and I build lots of consumer products, as did you. And especially for the mobile, right? Like, if people learn that I used to do mobile work at Google, they're like, yeah, this app, like, I was trying to do this, I don't know. And it's natural human tendency. You're like, oh, let me show you. And that's wrong. As a product manager, that's the wrong thing to do. Because if you have to show something to someone, that means there's a design fallacy.
No, absolutely. One of the things the teams I would work with, say, like, you are not going to either, unless you want to ship yourself with the product or a user manual, which you can't do in a B2C, and you can't do that. But just to, stir the controversy a little more, right? See,
and when was the last time anyone read a user manual, by the way?
No one ever, right? Exactly. So enterprise software you can get away with, and that's why, you see all these, people piling on, more many options, and 3-level, 4-level, because you can also charge for 3-month training along with, as long as someone can manage to sell the software license, which is also changing now with the whole product-led growth and all of that. We'll talk about that later. But just on that bit of, see, look, founders actually don't have the luxury to stay arrogant for a very long period of time. To start somewhere, you also need some kind of, conviction. And I think both school of thought works. Either you are finding conviction because I, poll 10 people here and let them play with it, and they say either they love it or hate it, and that's a very strong signal. Or I start with, let's say, we give ourselves, I shouldn't say arrogance, but some confidence that, I have some pulse of consumer, and that's my initial hunch. And I'm going to give you some runway, but eventually data will obviously speak for itself. You can't run with that hunch in the face of everyone telling you the shit, you need to drop it, right?
Right.
But, that's... okay, how does then, let's say somebody working a fresh product, nothing exists. Where does one start? How do I come up with the, this whole thing of MVP? Some articulation, someone needs to put a stake in the ground that I'm going to try to build this. So how would you suggest, what is one way, or maybe a few different ways for someone to arrive at some, reasonable MVP definition?
So, I think we should maybe look at it from a slightly different lens, which is the following. Needs are universal. Products are not, right? So we build products to solve a need, not product for product's sake. And this is something that people, don't realize. And this is one of the biggest reasons why, especially consumer products, fail quite a bit, because people are building something for the sake of building that, as opposed to saying, what is the need here that I'm trying to solve? So needs, getting to understand the fundamental need, and then understanding the depth of that need, the breadth of that need, and the acuteness of that need, that's not a very difficult thing to do. But most people don't apply themselves there, right? We jump into, because no one wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to use Google. Right? Although Google's used by probably 4 to 5 billion people every day. Some Google product, right? If not Google search. But even Google search is used by billions of people every day. But people wake up in the morning and they are like, just like today, I had to get to your office from my hotel. I looked up Google Maps, but I wasn't thinking I want to look up Google Maps. I'm like, I need directions to get to, Mukesh's place, and I need to know how long it will take me.
Google Maps has not found product market fit in Bangalore, so the estimates are still not accurate.
But they're probably directionally correct, right?
Yes.
So the point is, if you think in terms of solutions, you get to product market fit faster. And the MVP is that, am I getting sufficient coverage of the depth of that need and the breadth of that need? And that becomes a minimum viable product. I also have this challenge with MVP, the construct of MVP, right? Because where do you draw the line? And, there's this very controversial statement that, has been attributed to Reed, and I have had long discussions about this, where he would say, if you're happy with the first version of your product, like you worked on it too long or something to that effect.
That's right.
Right?
I'm seeing it. Yeah.
And I'm like, but would you ever deploy a shitty product? Like, you absolutely should be proud of what you deploy. And, his point was more around, like, do you even know there's a need? Like, just get something out fast and you can iterate on it faster. And then, it got paraphrased in a certain way and people start interpreting it in whichever way they want.
Yeah, there is a continuum, right? I think is where you draw the line, and that's the judgment, right? And that's probably judgment in some ways, part of product management training is to training their judgment. There is no right or wrong. You can draw a line here, a little further, but somewhere, you can't be too early or too late.
And you can't wait forever, right? So, one of the things I tell everyone a lot is that my definition of a great product manager is that it's a person who has the brain of an engineer, the heart of a designer, and the speech of a diplomat. Right? The diplomacy we talked about earlier, because you have to do so much through influence. The brain of a engineer and heart of a designer is very appropriate for this conversation, this part of the conversation we are having, right? Because you need to know the art of the possible. So you should never specify, like, okay, let's assume that going to Mars was a burning desire for everybody, but space technology or rocket technology had not been discovered yet. You should at least know that. So then you can go back to fundamentals and try and figure that out. Right. The heart of a designer is very important, because, great artists, great designers kind of know that continuum, that balance, which is like, how do I pique enough of your curiosity and meet enough of your need to make this desirable? And then you can continue building on it later.
Yeah, speaking of, metaphors of, artists and designers and engineers, I think in your this lecture series, you talk about librarian mindset versus the poet mindset. Can you talk more about both? Like, why those metaphors and what are the relevance of that in different product contexts?
And that metaphor actually, comes from Drew Houston, and I think it's a very apt metaphor.
Drew is the founder of
Dropbox. Yeah. That's right. And the way to think about it is the following, and he said it in the following context, which is, in his opinion, people can either be like super creative and come up with all kinds of ideas, or they're very good at executing somebody else's ideas. And as a founder, you need to know who you are so you can find someone who's compatible with you. So at Facebook, for example, and I've not worked with Mark Zuckerberg, but talking to people there, he's really the product strategist. So he needs more librarians to work with him, because if there are two poets, they'll all have their, they'll both have their own types of poetry and it may clash. And the person who will suffer will be the user.
So let's first clarify, what is the job of a librarian type of mindset, in a product manager? What does the person do?
A librarian, my interpretation of that is they are very good at cataloging. They're very good at executing. They're very good at taking someone's product strategy and breaking it down systematically to decide what needs to happen. So you can almost think of them as the system architect engineer, right? You take a complex problem or a complex pathway, if you will. So it's the construction manager to the architect's dream, right? When you build the house, you need both, right? But if you just have two architects, the house may never be built. If you have two construction people, you may not get like a beautiful artifact.
Yeah, and a lot of product management is about details. I remember in my product manager days, I used to love writing long, PRDs, and I think we used to call functional specs also in those
That's
days. I don't know
right.
if people do it anymore or not.
I don't think so, but
yeah,
I know exactly
but
what
I've
you
written
mean.
very long, where you'll every boundary condition, you write
Correct.
something and so on and on, right? But I mean, I don't think librarian here is implied in any negative connotation.
No, absolutely not. You need both. Like I said, right? An architect's dream cannot be implemented without, so both are required, right? These are yin and yang. They're two parts of the same coin. If you don't have both, then you get something, a
And
poor outcome.
This poet mindset, so where does that come from? Because a lot of, when a lot of people move from engineering to product management, I'm guessing a lot of them are probably not coming in as a poet or dreamer or imagine, but there are a bunch of people who come from, non-engineering background also. Do you think a little bit where you come from also has a bearing on whether what kind of, mindset you end up more of?
No, I think those are probably stereotypical, so maybe more so than not. In fact, I was going to say that, when you talk about functional specs, etc., I've done both. I've written extremely detailed ones and I've written some very broad-based ones. And what I learned very early in my career is when to deploy which ones. Because ultimately, who's the spec for? It's for our engineers. So when I had really creative engineers who worked with me, I didn't want to stymie their creativity and give them every boundary condition. For them, it was better if I specified what the end objective was, give certain paths along the way, and then say, hey, you have the freedom within this to be creative and come up with interesting things. And typically when you're coding, you come up with a lot more boundary conditions than we can ever envision without having to write that code, right? We may come up with 90% of them. If you're very good, maybe 95%, but definitely not 100%. And sometimes the engineers were like, look, just tell me exactly what you need, like, where every Lego block fits, and I'll design the best Lego block house for you. And then for them, you have to write the long ones.
And this, what works for engineering, do you think is more of a function of a culture, or it's very specific, team, or even the way to individual engineers, what works for me? Like, how do you navigate this?
I think there's definitely self-selection. So some cultures attract one type of engineers or one type of product manager versus the other. And as a result, you need to know what culture you're walking into.
I'm sure you come across this, Amazon that starting with a press release.
Yes.
What do you think of that as a tool for product managers?
I think it's an important tool. It's not the only tool. Like, we need to have multiple tools in our arsenal. The press release approach is a good approach because it bounds you to the need. So you're not like you're not on this perpetual motion machine of continuing to build. Once you figured out what your end goal should be, you can work backwards. It's a very system theoretic approach, right? You know where you want to be, you know the boundary conditions. Now let's design the best possible system to get there.
Let me zoom out, and this, now you said, spend 25 years kind of watching product management as a practitioner, as a teacher, as an investor. You think that the body of knowledge in product management is moving on? Is how product management is practiced now, is it fundamentally different, or it goes back to same, principles of really knowing who the customer is, really figuring out, what is the need that you've uncovered, what is the simplest, like, are the fundamentals remain same? Like, how is the field moving?
The field is building on itself. It's becoming richer, but the fundamentals don't change, right? It's almost like the laws of physics. Because we do quantum theory right now doesn't mean the original mechanical theories, that Newton's laws, they continue to be relevant. Einstein's theory of relativity is built on top of that, and today's quantum theory is built on top of that. And the same is happening with product management. I always like to say that the laws of business, the laws of product building, the laws of physics, they're immutable. You just like enrich and enhance them. Because fundamentally, what does a product manager do? We identify a basic human need and we design some product, whether physical or virtual, to satisfy that need. Human needs have not changed since the beginning of time, right? We may have become more sophisticated, but it's all Maslow's hierarchy in terms of what our needs are. So you have to understand them. the best products appeal to us in a very emotional way, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be like a beautifully designed glass that always gives us the best grip. It keeps the water cool, or it keeps it warm when we need
handle
it.
in the right place.
Warm, the handle in the right place, of course, right? Doesn't spill even if we are a little bit sloppy with it, and so on and so forth. That's our need. Now we can solve it in 200 different ways, and come up with fancy handles which look beautiful and are not functional.
So how is the field kind of building on itself? Like, what are the new things you think has come up in the last 5-7 years? What do product managers today are doing or should consider doing that, let's say, when you and I were product manager, we were not doing?
So one of the things that has really evolved over the last 10 years, I think, maybe two things that we can touch on, and they are a little bit interrelated. When we first got our start in product management, and even when we were doing consumer products, we didn't really think of growth engineering as engineering or science, right? It kind of sort of happened naturally. It was almost like build a great product and the users will come.
And marketing and sales will take care of it.
And marketing and sales. And somehow, magically people started using it and thinking about it. Like Larry and Sergey didn't think about like some big mechanism to get Google search in the hands of people. And although it was the 9th or the 10th search engine, it suddenly became very popular because the product was so amazing, right, at what it did. Today, I think people have figured out ways and means of making the product stand out amongst the noise, right? And growth has become like an engineering, like a science. So that's, I think, one that is important. And that has led to this whole field of product-led growth. How do you do that? The open source movement also now tells you that, look, you don't have to conceive everything about a product because the community will build on your product for you. So that's something new. That wasn't something when we got started was there. So I think product management or product building has become more participatory now in some ways. And that's actually kind of fun to watch, right? Because it evolves. It also means that we have to learn how to give up control. We are no longer the owners of the product, right? We are concierges or we are caretakers of that product.
No, absolutely. I think those are, I don't remember working on, at least until I had my own startups, trying to, we all borrowed some of these things from Facebook, and I think you talked to Chamat, we'll come back to that, we all started building all these growth hacking teams.
Correct.
And this whole, reliance on, and I guess this is, building on next layer. So does this also mean the product managers today need to be some ways more technical in terms of awareness of what's possible, what's out there, what are the things, so they're baking that in kind of solution they are doing and putting hands to engineer, or it's more of a collaborative thing? Product manager knows what we are trying to do, engineer will figure out what are the libraries and tools that how much does a product manager need to know?
I don't think a product manager needs to know everything, but at the same time, again, knowing the art of the possible is very important for two reasons. One, you're not placing unreasonable demands on the person who actually has to build it, right? And that is important because my daughter is a software engineer, and I cannot tell you the number of times she complains. She's like, my product managers think that everything is highest priority and it should all be done yesterday. Like, do they understand how to build these systems? Right. And that's something you never want to hear from your engineering counterpart, right? Like, because you lose their trust. Yeah. And that trust is a very important relationship that you need to have. Yeah. So they need to respect the fact that you respect their art. Yeah. And the only way you can do that is if you understand what goes into what they do every day.
So how does somebody who does not have a training as an engineer, who ends up in product management, maybe come from marketing track or done MBA somewhere, how do those folks build this enough context so they can earn respect of engineers and talk the language to some extent and understand constraints and what it takes to put everything together?
Yeah, I think that engineers have people with engineering backgrounds or technical backgrounds definitely have a little bit of an edge in terms of moving into product management because they have some of these inherent skills. But these are skills. You can, if you have the aptitude, you'll build them over time. You just have to work a little harder in the beginning. And I've seen enough people who don't have classical technical training becoming amazing product managers and go on to lead some pretty phenomenal products out there, and some very good technical people fail at it. So it really is an aptitude and it's a labor of love. Like you need to be thinking, breathing, just like any person who wants to be at the top of their chosen field. Like you need to live, breathe, and think it all the time.
Right. And I guess a lot of just curiosity. And in today's day and age, I guess pretty much everything is learnable. There is
Exactly.
just, as long as you are able to ask the question, then answers are, and very soon, I guess, there's going to be ChatGPT version of product managers. Maybe we'll come back to that as well,
that will make that. Generative AI may completely change everything we are
Right.
talking about here today.
Yeah. So just, I want to go back to a very early stage, and, and you've, again, in your, this lecture series, you've talked about this in the upfront, early stage founders and how they think about products. Now, if you look at my journey, because I was coming from product management background, I kind of assumed that, I'm a decent in product management, and I was pretty heavy-handed in terms of, taking product calls, and it some was I will take the final call and so on. We did build the product management team. I think it was a while back, after many years, eventually hire a CPO equivalent. But I was coming from a product background, so perhaps had some right to act that way. But let's someone who's starting out, initially, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. As a founder of the company, you ought to have some point of view that this product, because there is some need in the market that I've uncovered and I want to build. How does those early stage founders who may not have product background, how should they navigate building the product team? Ultimately, someone needs to make a call.
Right.
So who's that person especially in the environment where someone is not coming from a product background, which I'm guessing majority of startups don't have founders, probably more engineer founders, but it's just like a product manager, not only that many.
Right.
So how do those folks navigate? Including maybe you can also touch on, even product managers, CEO job is different than a product management job. So how should one think about it?
It really is, and also to make it even more challenging a discussion, how do you decide to hire your first product manager versus your first product leader? And those are two different things, and sometimes people conflate the two. And we found that it was different enough that we wrote two different essays about it, and the product leader essay has just evoked a lot of response from the community because it really resonates. So there are probably three possibilities, right? So you have a founder who has product background like you did. It's a little bit easier in the sense that you can show the product direction. You have a point of view of what needs to be built. So the early days are good, right? You can get that going. But soon what happens is, the company starts growing. You're also the CEO and you need to start spending time there. So you have to make a call and you have to decide, hey, am I going to be the CEO and then the head of product, or I'm going to be the head of product first and then the CEO second, or I'm going to pick one or the other. And, it's a personal call, and a lot of people don't make it explicitly. And sometimes they just go back and forth saying, oh, today I need to be this and tomorrow I need to be that. It creates a lot of whipsawing in the organization, and recognizing that, I think, is important. And then once you have somebody doing either one of the two jobs, you have to let them do that job. So that's where a lot of the failure modes do happen. The second situation could be that the founder is technical, not with a product background necessarily, and you're obviously building the product. In many of those cases, what I find is the product is highly technical to begin with, right? Because they're trying to solve some technical need. In which case, I think it still ends up being a subset or a fairly large overlap Venn diagram of the first case, and similar things apply. The third case, where the founder is neither a product or a technical person and wants to build a company, that's a little bit hard. And in that case, having a co-founder who can do those things does become important. Sometimes this happens I think I've seen this happen more in enterprise software startups, because there, let's say you were in a commercial function or you were in a go-to-market function, you may discover needs, right? You understand what the customer really wants. You look around and you don't see that need being fulfilled in any way, shape, or form. There, understanding that customer is very important. Having a co-founder or someone who's really an equal intellectual partner to you, who can translate those needs that you can articulate really well by virtue of being in the field into what the product should be, can be an amazing partnership.
Got it.
And an amazing success thing. Siebel system is a great example of that. Tom Siebel, when he started the company, Tom was in sales at Oracle, and he saw this need. And who did he partner with? He partnered with people like David Schmeier, who was his first head of product, Ed Abbo, and they had all worked together, and they all had their skills. Ed Abbo, was the engineering person, David was the product person, and Tom was the salesperson.
And if you end up making the choice early on, then you also need to really let go of a lot of product control this person, because that person effectively becomes product founder.
Exactly.
But you can't have two people, in the kitchen driving, things, because you are founder and CEO.
Yes.
Versus, and then you have a product lead in the beginning.
Right.
And if I could simplify that, my interpretation of that is, if you have some product or technical background or even confidence, then maybe you are better off being the product leader early on. Start with product managers, and at some point when the responsibility starts to grow, then you hire a product leader.
I would agree with that. And look, Tom Siebel went through a lot of heads of sales because, while he was the CEO, he was also an excellent sales leader. And so there would always be some challenges there. And similarly, founders who have great technical or product background go through lots of heads of those respective functional departments because they have strong points of views. And, the trick is to find someone who is copacetic with you and really spend that time. It took me close to 9 months before I decided to join LinkedIn as the head of product, because I was stepping into Reid Hoffman's shoes. It was both the founder and the head of product. And, both he and I came to this conclusion that we really needed to understand each other's philosophies, see how together we were, and the differences, would they be additive or would they be clashing with each other? And really spend that time, to harmonize our wavelengths, if you will, before I took that job.
So this was when you were moving from Google to LinkedIn.
That's right.
And so for 9 months, you were having this conversation. And was the explicit agreement at some point that Reid will let you make the final product call? Was that important for you? What
yes,
was that?
For both of us, it was important. Yes. And
was it easy for him to agree to that?
Reid's probably one of the most self-aware people I've ever worked with in my life. He's a deep thinker. He thinks about lots of things. And the 9 months were not spent like just talking randomly. We would literally spend 2 to 3 hours every weekend. And the conversations were usually would take like 3 different parts. One, personal philosophies of life, because I think it's important when you work really closely together to have, similarities. The second were more like professional philosophies, how we thought about teams, how we thought about talent, how we thought about just company building. And the third is we would always talk about some problem or product related thing that he was working on at LinkedIn to see how would we handle this problem together. And that told us our working styles. And even after I joined LinkedIn, the one thing I recognized in that process of 9 months was what a great and deep thinker he is. And I never wanted to lose that. So I made him commit to me that I want to be able to spend as much time as I need with him discussing whatever I need to about the products. And he said, 100%, but I also want you to know that the decision will always be yours. Whatever I tell you is my opinion, my advice. And if I feel really strongly about something, I'll tell you that. However, you still get to make the final decision. So we had a very explicit contract, if you will, but it came from both of us recognizing that that's what would make LinkedIn, the company, successful.
Oh, that's outstanding. It's a good thing for a lot of startup founders, especially when company starts to do well, to keep in mind. At some point, you do want to bring in leaders from outside, but yet you are not willing to let go of the control. You want to be able to make the most important calls. Somewhere, either really good people will not join you,
right?
If they don't spend this 9 months, really testing your intentions deeply, or even they join, they will feel discontent because there has to be one master orchestrator, right?
Correct.
Because and a lot of calls, what I realize is they're not necessarily great on day one. You make a call and you make it great over a period of time, by maneuvering and dealing with the crisis, etc. Right? So it's not. But if you don't have a wiggle room and that leeway, then nothing will come in the way. So I think that's something for founders to either not get some heavy hitter CXO, or if you do, then really empower them for a while. Ultimately, obviously, you hold them accountable for the result, but without a runway, you will not see those results.
Exactly, right? You have to make sure that everyone's making the best possible decision they can with the data they have at that point in time. And with additional data, everyone should reserve the right to change their minds about what that decision ought to be.
That's right. Yeah. So during your LinkedIn time, are there any features you recall? I know that I think those are hyper growth phase at LinkedIn, which you think were game changer, maybe continues to be relevant to LinkedIn till this day?
Oh my gosh, there was just so many things, and so many folks, have contributed to that success. Maybe one big one, and remember, this was still in the 2008 to 2010 timeframe when the iPhone had just come out in 2007. So every company at that time was trying to figure out how important was mobile to their strategy, and responsive development was still not a thing. And so you had to really dedicate teams to build mobile environments. Plus, iPhone was not as pervasive as it is today. Android had not yet come out in full force, right? The first Nexus phone came out in 2009, so 2 years after the iPhone. And there were lots of other devices. There were Motorola devices, the Asian Samsung, LG, Sony had devices. BlackBerry was still very prominent. So if you committed to mobile, then you have to make all these calls of, well, do we build apps? Do we build just websites? And is it going to be HTML, 5.0, which was like the big mobile thing? You recall all of that. These are all very resource intensive decisions. And when you're growing so much on just regular websites, like, should you be doing all this? And we made a call, and part of it was driven by the fact that I had spent the time building Google's business and starting it and then, growing it. So I felt very strongly that mobile was the next big technical shift in consumer products. And that turned out to be the right call. But at that time, we did divert a bunch of resources for, from LinkedIn to also work on mobile. But there were several other people in the company who were involved in that decision and also, I think, contributed heavily, including Reed, to it. But I think that did
early pivot to mobile drove a lot of growth.
Exactly, and that was pretty important for us.
A couple of days ago, we were having this discussion on, as I was sharing with you what I think is the typical pattern in which most startups fail. So let me have a different version of, you would have seen the common mistakes, most product managers make. Like, what comes to mind, which is something, especially in the early days, or maybe even experienced product manager. What are the typical fault patterns that product managers tend to fall into?
The one very common one is that if something is not working, the instinct is to say, oh, we just need to build something more on top. Some more features are required, right? It's like the theory is it's like just around the corner. And when you think about it, it has two fallacies, right, which become quite obvious. The first is, why would you ever not put your best foot forward? Clearly, you launch with the features you thought were the most important. So the next set of features couldn't have been more important. Why suddenly do you have this epiphany that those are going to be more important? So are you just kicking the can down the road and not accepting the reality? The second fallacy is, we now have ways and means of collecting data on just about everything and understanding what people find useful or not find useful. And as a result, we should be able to tell in what we deployed, there would be some good things. So actually, you can still extract the good things out of a product that may not be doing well. And then saying, are the bad things actually masking the good things?
Right.
And how do you declutter that?
Yeah.
So, there's one saying I always have, which is, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication in product building. Right. And in many product reviews, if I thought that the product was getting very complex and people proposed new features, I would always say, great, I'll let you have this feature, but tell me which other feature you're going to take out.
Yeah.
That's not clutter the product.
Right. And that, it's so rare. I don't know in your practice, how many times you were able to do it, but the meetings to take out features are, not even 1/10 of the meetings people have about, adding next thing, and the feature just keeps adding. And by the time people take out a feature, it's like maybe no one ever knows, or one user using it. It's just too late. I don't run product teams directly anymore, but I think I'd love to institute that, the same frequency of addition and deletions. And I think that will, the simplicity, that's the only way it can come in, when you are continuously eliminating things.
No, it goes back to human psychology. Like, imagine going home talking to your spouse and they say, how's your day? And what did you do today? You have two choices. One is, I built this amazing thing and it's going to launch in 3 months and you will see it and you will interact with it and you're going to love it. Or I just deleted a bunch of things from the product. Which one will give you more joy to tell someone? They can't see what you deleted, right? So there's some reinforcement and pointing to something and saying, look, I built that, versus look, I deleted a whole bunch of useless stuff that was out there. There's a great anecdote that I talk about this that I'd love to share. So when Windows 2005, Office 2005 was being rebuilt, so that was a massive rewrite after, from 1995 to 2005. So it was like a 10-year period. So at Microsoft, they said, we have to rewrite the whole thing and rethink the product. So they did a massive user study of all products in Office. And what they found at the end of it, that 80% of features that the users were asking for already existed. They just couldn't find it. Because every successive generation of product managers had been continuing to build more and more features into the product.
That's right. And hence, micro office, navigation, you will click on, there was, 9 things on top, you click, then 15 things come.
Multiple
and
toolbars.
When you hover over it, then more things come up, right?
Yeah, the nested toolbar problem,
that's right?
And so eventually, their solution, again, was not to delete anything, but they invented something. Remember the Clippy?
Clippy, yes.
The Clippy.
That was 20-year-old version of AI.
Right. Well, yes, but it generated some pretty extreme reactions, right? Like there were Usenet groups of all.clippy.die.die.die. One die was not sufficient. People were like, please go away.
Yeah. No, I remember, and I also remember all the hate it generated for Microsoft product. But I think Microsoft come a long way since then. But on this point, right, this thing of, I guess, eliminating features, one of those things, bunch of other things which we know are good for us, but there is, you can't brag about it and you can't get credit for it today, and hence, people don't tend to. But I'm guessing bunch of, a lot of product managers will end up watching this. So maybe one clear thing everyone can do, please kill one feature in your product. That's probably the biggest, benefit you can derive from today's podcast. But
so I will give a simple tool to practice this at home before, because it may feel like a big thing to go and propose that you kill something on a product. Every time you buy something, take something out of your closet. So put one in, take one out.
Right.
And so that's a simple way of practicing it every day.
Right. And
when you buy a new book, make sure one of your old books you donate to the library or give it to a friend.
It's an outstanding tool, and I would love to incorporate. I mean, from a fashion background, I tend to buy a lot of. So my wardrobe is just stuffed, with things. So I guess you can talk. Yeah, you're right, and that's why probably the mental model will get sharpened that you're doing it at home, and
exactly
the same thing.
And it's also a great I practice Jain philosophy, and one of the 5 principles of Jain philosophy is aparigraha, which is non-attachment. Right. So when you start discarding things, you're practicing non-attachment to things. Right. And so then it will also feed into our professional lives.
Excellent. And product manager needs to have a little bit of detachment with the features they built, right?
We have to be dispassionate.
Yeah. I think I'm not recalling, but in one of this minimalism book, I think somebody said this, this title was "Kill Your Darlings." And the idea was, that, you tend to fall in love with some of the things you're building.
Right.
And unless you get rid of them, there's no space left for something, even better and more beautiful. Deep, I'm going to change the topic a little bit. So you made a transition into the world of, investment. You worked with SoftBank for a number of years and now with General Catalyst. And I guess you probably also have the knack of ending up, things where, things are really, hyper growth and this roller coaster. I think VC industry has gone through that in last 7-8 years. So, coming from a product background, does it make you a different type of VC compared to, let's say, other people who have been into venture industry for a long period of time, joined as a analyst, principal, and grown through the ranks in that, or entrepreneurs have built something at some point, had their exit, versus you've been building product all this while, and a lot of, I guess, venture business is about you are investing in 2 things, either people or products.
Correct.
So how does product background help you look at things differently?
Yeah, actually, you almost always invest in people because the products change over time. People don't. So there are 2 things that I feel have been very beneficial to my investing career. The first is that I was also an entrepreneur and I started a company, and that company didn't go very well, right? So it was not a huge success. But that gave me tremendous founder empathy and understanding how high the highs can be and how low the lows can be, and to really empathize with the fact that the founder lives with it 24/7. And it's not just about the success of whatever it is that they are building and the company, but also the responsibility they bear for everyone they've hired and all the people on their team. And that's a huge responsibility. And having gone through it, I'll never forget it. And that's given me like an enormous sense of respect and empathy for the founders. And then having been an operator building products and businesses both at Google and LinkedIn, and I got very fortunate, right? We built like multi-billion-dollar businesses. I was responsible for over $1 billion of revenue at LinkedIn, along with my product responsibilities. I've seen how you can create massive growth in businesses, and what are the signs and what kinds of things you look for, but more importantly, how can you help businesses be that way? And so I view my job as an investor, to pick the right founders, but then help them bring out their best potential through advice, opinion, counsel, and whatever help that they need in order to build these, hyper growth businesses. So those are the places where I think it has been beneficial to have the kind of background that I did, and I'm very fortunate. But just like we talked about product management earlier, there are many paths to success in the investing business also. There are many career, investors like my partner Hemant, for example, or Peter Fenton, who started their venture career 20 plus years ago and are phenomenal investors and, continue to invest in some amazing companies.
Let's look. So this part, pretty much, I think everyone in venture industry will agree with you that to a large extent, it is about investing behind people, but people are complicated. They're very difficult to judge. And as a VC also, it's not like, you can, date somebody for a year to figure out is the right. What are some of the, built-in heuristics, signals you look for, both positive and negative, to kind of calibrate and develop your comfort around people on your unique style of, figuring out, who is, something that you feel comfortable backing?
You're right. You can't really figure someone out right away. But at the same time, I had a semi-arranged marriage in the sense that we were introduced by our parents, and while we both had the option to say yes or no, we didn't have a long dating period to decide whether we liked each other or not. And 30 years later, we are still together, and I like to believe very much in love with each other. So I like to use the same sort of thinking where you can tell the extremities of someone rather quickly. You can't tell the nuances of someone right away. And you have to decide that the extremities, both positive and negative, are okay with your value system to begin with. And the nuances will always change over time because people do change over time. So that's one part. The other part is for the founders. While you may meet them for the first time and you may not have spent a lot of time with them, we all leave breadcrumbs of our lives behind us. And it's, reference checking is very important. Talking to people who work with that individual is very important. And by the way, I would say the same for the founder and the investor partner that they are choosing. Like, they should do the same diligence, because our characters are revealed in adversity, not when everything's going well. And every company, as you know, having been a founder multiple times, goes through adversity of some sense, right? And sometimes you come out of it, sometimes you don't. And the partners you have around you and how empathetic they are, how helpful they are, and how understanding they are makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Do you also end up, given that, you have depth of knowledge in product side, do you spend inordinate amount of time just going through the product as well and try to understand intricacies, or now that your VC head, people part has become way more important than?
It depends on the stage of the company. Okay. Sometimes there is no product to think about, and you can then conceptually talk about what their vision is. And then, in a later stage company, I will definitely, play with the product, etc. But I don't try to impose my judgment on it, because by then the market's already spoken. Right. Sure. So do they have the users? Do they have the customers, etc.? And that is actually a much more important barometer, going back to the point of like, are you building the product because it's your need or is it the market's need, right? I believe in the latter. So I let the market speak. The one thing that can be a detriment, so we talked about the positives of having my kind of background. It can be detrimental to know too much, right? Because then we can feel that we know so much that we want to impose our will on the founder. And the biggest mistake we can make is to forget that our knowledge may be correct, but in the previous version. And every version can be different.
Right. That's right. Yeah. So do you refrain from giving product advice to companies you work with, or you use the same Reed's formula that, look, this is my opinion, but you take the final call?
So I actually have a very in-depth conversation with founders before we make an investment, before I lead an investment. And I say, here are the 4 areas in which I can be helpful. And the model I like to use is an OKR-based model. Say, every quarter we should get together, and you should tell me in these 4 areas, where can I be helpful to you? And the 4 areas are as follows. The first one is system of leadership, because every company is only as successful as the depth and the quality of the people that they have. And it can't just be only the founders, right? Eventually, the company runs out of steam if it's only 1, 2, or 3 people that can sustain it. So what are the systems of leadership you will put in place? And this is where, the great experience I got at Google and LinkedIn becomes really valuable, because you look at, each one of those companies and the depth of leadership and the quality of the people that continue to be there, that have gone out and done some amazing things, like that there were systems of leadership in place. The second thing we talk about is foundations for future success. It turns out that 95% of technology companies do not continue as independent companies for more than 20 years. Okay, and these are like Siebel Systems, Silicon Graphics, Netscape, Oracle, even LinkedIn, right? It's still thriving, but not as an independent company. And part of the reason is that they continue doing the same thing that they were founded on until the very end, right? Sun Microsystems was still building high-end servers. Silicon Graphics was still doing graphics servers, Netscape, etc. You have to continue reinventing yourself. Like Facebook today is very different than Facebook when it started in 2005. Google is very different today than it was. Microsoft's had like 5, 7 different avatars, right, in this time frame. So that innovation doesn't just happen. You have to plan for it. And again, having seen it at places like Google, that's one of the places where I start working with founders to say, what are your successive S-curves? How do you think about investing in it while you're nurturing, something that's working really well? Because you can't kill that, but you have to nurture the next crop, and the next crop. The third is product and strategic shorter term things, right? So I don't even lead with that necessarily, because as a founder, that's one of the things you should actually intuitively know. The first 2 things, unless you've done hyper growth before, can be actually hard for you to do. And the fourth one is also a little bit counterintuitive, but some things that, we have a lot of bench strength at General Catalyst, but I also learned a lot at SoftBank, which is different forms of capital that are required by a company. It's not just equity capital or debt capital. And really sophisticated companies manage their capital structures really well. And, that's another place. And that's really for very, later stage companies. But since I invest in up and down the stack, that's the fourth area. So that's what I have that conversation. Usually I'll have a dinner with a founder at the beginning of every quarter. And I'm like, okay, Mukesh, which one of these things is important for you this particular quarter, and what can I be helpful to you?
And do you think this framework is a little more geared towards later stage, or some version? Okay, it is. Okay.
Yeah, some of it is more later stage, but some is earlier stage. So foundations for future success actually can be any stage. Product and business strategy obviously is any stage. To be honest, actually, now that I think about it, capital structure is probably more later stage. The first 3 can be any stage. And your system of leadership, you should be thinking about from day one.
Got it. And these are, outside the boardroom conversation. You meet one-on-one, have in-depth conversation, right? So,
yes.
Right. Got it.
Yeah. Most important things, unfortunately, do not happen in boardrooms.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole other topic, Yeah. I'm actively involved in many boards, so probably better to not say anything at the moment. But yeah, we're at some point. I mean, the boards have obviously very important role to play.
Absolutely.
But takes, I think just someone has just recently sharing about somebody who does outstanding job of in a board meeting, but this person prepares, 2 days in advance. Now, how many board members out there who take 2 days to go through all the MIS, other competition, talk to people and come prepared? versus you just show up in the board meeting and start pontificating, right? Which all of us are different times guilty of. But okay, I'll park it there. I want to, you have spent, you've been big part of Silicon Valley ecosystem for last, almost 3 decades now in various capacity, has seen so many technological shift. You've also been very actively involved in India and again in various avatars, and you would have seen Indian ecosystem evolve. And we've obviously come a long way. I think when I moved back here in 2007, really no ecosystem to speak of today. It's very thriving ecosystem, but still no Silicon Valley. So from your vantage point, what other thing you think the Indian ecosystem at large should see develop over next 5 to 10 years, so that we continue to make, march towards being, next Silicon Valley, or at least, some kind of Silicon Valley in Indian context?
Yeah. So the one thing I always tell companies, and I think this is relevant also for geographies, is that you win by being the best of what you are, not by trying to compete with something or somebody else, right? So why be the next Silicon Valley? Just be the best India that we can be, and develop our own identity and own way of, I don't think anyone at China. So here's an interesting thing. Even within the US, right? It's like Austin's the Silicon, the next Silicon Valley, or there's a Silicon Alley in New York, and then there's the whole Pacific Northwest cluster. If you go to China, no one says that Shanghai is the next Silicon Valley. Shanghai is Shanghai.
Okay, I get it. So let me rephrase my question. See, I was just looking at the top 100 companies on Indian Stock Exchange, and almost all of them are banks, financial services companies, IT services companies, lot of infra companies, and probably only one new age company which is among top listed 100 companies, Zomato, which is about $10-11 billion valuation, compared to US top 100 companies, more than half of them, and by value I think it's probably 60-70% is tech companies. So we in terms of value creation, impact, profit generation, there's a long way to go. So something has to happen in the ecosystem. So if you have any point of view, what are the next stage of things we need to, in our own context, to navigate?
So several things. So I've been involved now with the Indian ecosystem since about 2006, when I took on the role at Google to be the head of Asia Pacific. And from then to now, I think we are now in version 3.0. Okay. That version, when tech companies were being formed, really, in V 1.0, most, if not all founders, wanted to get to a certain point and then sell, because it would be life-changing money for them. And that was totally okay. But what that did was it didn't generate a generation of people who knew how to take things all the way and make things like really, really big. In version 2.0, some people actually did it. Everybody else started looking at them and saying, wait, if Sanjeev at Naukri can do it and has done it, and Deep at Make My Trip has done it, and Just Dial is doing it, hey, I should set my sights a lot higher, and it can be done in this country, right? So that mentality shift started happening, and people started doing it. And at some level, you're part of that generation, right? And you did it too.
I looked up to Deep and Sanjeev, for sure. These are the guys who were there and the only people for us to look up to.
And you did it, you cracked it, and then Sachin and Binny at Flipkart cracked it, and so on. Current crop of entrepreneurs, version 3.0, right? These are the Bhavishes and Naveens and Ritesh and others of this genre. They looked at you and Sachin and everybody else above them, and they're like, wait, not only are they successful, we worked with many of them. So we kind of know how this whole thing works. So they're not just looking at you as mentors, they looked at you as peer sets, and they learned from you firsthand. And so now we have a whole crop of people, and then they've been building their companies, and many of their folks have spun out and they are starting their own companies. That has created a thriving ecosystem. And that's exactly what happened in Silicon Valley. So now to bring that parallel back, right? It's always great to look at other success and say what you can draw from it. Where I draw the distinction is, don't just try to emulate, because context is so different, right? And so let's be our own people, but absolutely take the best from them.
Yeah.
So if you look at Fairchild, which was the original semiconductor, it had its fair children, right? And eventually, like, Intel became one of them. And that's how it became Silicon Valley, because it was a semiconductor business. But then that's how that ecosystem whole started. And there are some amazing books about how the history of Silicon Valley has evolved. And it talks about that lineage. It talks about people at Atari, and then they spun out to do X, Y, and Z, and then people at National Semi, and then from Fairchild, and then became Intel, and from Intel they went to Nvidia and all kinds of other things. Oracle is one of them, right? Like so many people spun out of Oracle. Then Google's become one of them. So every successful company spawns its sets of people. That in turn attracts capital. There's no dearth of capital in India now. And so I think India is now very fertile. This is why I'm super bullish, and I spend even more of my time here. This is the beginning stage of that fertility, right? Like it's no longer just sowing the seeds and seeing which ones sprout. The plants are becoming bigger. They're becoming like young trees, and soon the banyan trees are going to proliferate, and their offshoots will create more banyan trees. And you want to be there from the beginning. That's like the best time to be as an investor.
And this, I think, a Fairchild Semiconductor analogy in some ways, quite apt, because literally I've seen the data now. There's between Flipkart and Myntra ecosystem. I can Nandan use this slide. When he talks about the digital public infrastructure. Like over 700 companies come out of these two companies alone.
Yes.
So that is the, and some of them are pretty well-known companies also. One of the Swiggy, co-founder was ex-Myntra, and many others,
Right.
So I think we are seeing that. But some other things, we are yet to see. Like, ultimately, with this technology innovation, you need to have this very powerful profit engines.
Yeah.
Because in some way that drives everything, So that's, I think, our ecosystem is yet to get to that point.
But that will come. So let me offer you 3 observations / thoughts on that topic. So the first one is, when you talk about digital public infrastructure, UPI, Aadhaar, ONDC, some are obviously more pervasive and successful, like UPI. ONDC is just beginning to do its thing. DPI will take its own form. These things are world-class. In fact, they're best in class, right? Here, I don't have to worry if you have a Venmo account and I should Venmo to you. It's like, you are on UPI rails, I'm on UPI rails. It doesn't matter. I can transfer money to you immediately. I don't have to even think about it. All this notion of like cross-application, cross-platform thing doesn't exist anymore. That whole friction is gone. The Western world is still stuck, right? We are in the landline days in the US, whereas you are on 5G. Already when it comes to payment infrastructure. That's amazing. And that tells us that, look, it's not about Silicon Valley. Like, this can be its own thing. So that's one part. There are parts, though, where, what you're talking about profits is actually a very interesting thing here, which is the kinds of activities that generate profit, say in consumer tech companies in the US or the Western world, are very different than what happens here. It took Google forever to get to $1 billion in ad revenue in India, because the purchasing power parity of a consumer is, it's still 1/15 that of someone in the US. So automatically, that area under the curve is not as large. So now you have to think about other ways. People also are not used to paying for things, right? So the whole notion of monthly subscriptions, etc., doesn't happen. Like, the average US consumer now has like a dozen plus subscriptions. I don't think that's true in India. So we have to then think of other ways of generating those profit pools. And what are those things? Like, and only an Indian entrepreneur in the Indian context can think of. Nobody's from outside is going to be able to tell us that. I think that's the second observation, that we have to rethink, even as we think of products that appeal to the same human psychology. You have to think of different commercial engines in order to monetize the value that's being created, right? The third part is governance, right? So historically, this is still a country where I think fewer than 10% of the people file income tax returns. So this economy has always been an unstructured economy, and we've all grown up with that unstructured economy. And as a result, the notion of governance is a little bit foreign to companies here. If we truly want to become, whichever NSE 100, NASDAQ 100 company, etc., we have to become a lot more structured in the way we govern our companies, in the way we do reporting, in the way we think about profit pools, treatment of employees, etc. So that thinking has to happen. That's very structural.
Right. No, excellent. They're all very pertinent point, and I'm pretty sure people are thinking about it. And let's hope next 5 years, we make progress on these dimensions as well, and therefore we can have both Indian context and probably also on a global stage. We have a lot more companies and success and UPI like paradigms to showcase. I want to just spend some time on AI, and I'll tell you a little more from a personal vantage point. I'm part of my day job. What I do at CureFit, which is our fitness business. In my venture studio, looking at various industries, health, education, retail, etc. So that is inside the company context. And then when I go out to any conference or event, everyone's only talking about AI. So after 2 days, I feel like, I need to drop everything I'm doing and only do AI. And I'm pretty sure you probably, morning till night, you are hearing, AI related pitches. How should one navigate? Obviously, it's one of the most defining, I think, paradigm shift movement of our times, but it also takes some time to play out. So people who are trying to build things, what should be their mental model of, how tightly they need to embrace AI? And, because, on one hand, you can be really laggard, you can be left out. On the other hand, you can overcome it and you don't know which way things are going, and whether this AI itself will go through some kind of trough for some time before more mature platform emerge. So I think, what do you advise of, our first character is what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, remove hype from reality. And then people who are trying to build something, solving real world problems, how should think about AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. Something that obviously has, as an investor, consumed a lot of my time cycles. I've probably seen over 800 companies in the last 9 months alone.
Yeah.
So
see, there you go. Yeah.
And I don't think I've seen all of them, right? So there are a lot of people thinking about AI in a very meaningful way, which I think is great. But we have to step back and take this in perspective. And, this is where I think history can be an interesting teacher for us on how things can, progress. The first real businesses around the internet started happening in the mid 1990s, right? Like, I think Amazon was formed in 1993 or 1995, so, in that circa, right? Netscape, etc. However, LinkedIn was formed in 2003, Facebook was formed in 2005, ByteDance in, later, even later than that, right? Closer to like 2017, 2018. What that tells you is that when there is a big tectonic shift in technology, first there's a gap between when the technology movement starts to the first set of really amazing companies. And then that tectonic shift, if it's truly tectonic, will continue to spawn multiple amazing businesses over time. So this is not like a buffet that ends at 2 p.m. And so you better load up your plate like immediately. Otherwise you have a problem, right? This is a buffet that'll go on for many, many years to come. And so it's important to take a deep breath and to be very patient and intentional about what you choose to do. But the other part is that, while that tectonic shift has become apparent to many people, I think courtesy ChatGPT, which just made it very tangible and palpable to everybody, AI has been pervasive in our life for many, many years. How do you think Google provides us the best possible search results? Why do we think that, you were talking about the attention of the social media feeds? How did they start showing us this? ByteDance had like 10,000 people working on its feed 5 years ago. And that's why it is so amazing and so tailored, without network effects, without using growth hacking, right? This is like pure play AI at work and machine learning at work. Back in the day when you and I were in grad school students, like people were working on computer vision, we were all working on AI and ML in some way. So what changed now? So I think 3 things changed. One is compute has finally become powerful enough that all the math and algorithms that we knew about can actually be deployed kind of instantaneously, meaning in a matter of days, weeks, and months of training versus years of training. Because we could not even conceive of that. Like literally, I wanted to do my graduate work in computer vision, and the only way I could do that compute was to reserve time at an NCSA supercomputer machine, which would take months to get. And then, if at the end you made some mistake, now you're gone, like 6-9 months would have gone by. And that was clearly like career suicide, right? Like it would take you forever to get a PhD done. So most people moved away from it. Today, you don't have to worry about it. So that is one. Secondly, we've had some fundamental breakthroughs in algorithms. The transformer work that happened in 2017, so not yesterday, right? It took 5 to 6 years for it to start showing up. But even before that, like RNNs, DNNs, deep learning techniques, Jeff Hinton's work, that happened even 10 years prior to that. So things have gotten to critical mass from a math and algorithmic standpoint. And then the final thing is the number of people who are trained in these methodologies has also reached a critical mass. It's no longer a few hundred people. In Jeff Hinton's era, right, at that point in time, you could count the 100 or 1,000 people who understood those things. Today, there are tens of thousands of people. Google Brain itself has over 2,000 people. So those three things coming together has suddenly now created this grand explosion. And it feels suddenly like an innovative, massive moment has arrived, but it has been decades into the making. Will it have its ups and downs? Absolutely, right? Already, if you look at Google Trends, GPT, the search term GPT hit its peak in April of this year. And it's been steadily going down since then. People who must have written their favorite poems on ChatGPT have stopped doing so now. But more interesting and important things are happening. So what does this mean for people who are starting companies? If you're starting a software company today, and if you're not thinking of using generative AI in a very powerful way, my prediction, and I usually don't make very strong conviction predictions, but this one I will say with some conviction, is that company may be doomed to fail. And the reason is the following. If you look at enterprise software historically, and you strip away all the accoutrements and the embellishments, what is it really? It's a structured database where the key IP is your data model and its extensibility. And then you have a bunch of forms and fields on top to interact with that data. Because you have to either, ingest some data into the database, or you have to, egress some out into that form or field, and you put some workflows in the middle that do actions on that data. And then you have humans interacting with it. Now, all of a sudden, with generative AI, you don't need structured data anymore. It can make sense of the data in any form, structured or unstructured. So all of a sudden, this core IP of data models goes away. The forms and fields go away because you can now converse with it in natural language. You don't have to think of special hotkeys and drop-down menus and all those progressive bars we were talking about earlier. And similarly, the workflow is irrelevant because you can just say file my expense report, as opposed to going in your favorite expense report system, uploading your information, taking the drop down, putting in the thing, it going to the AP person, it going to a manager, getting the approval, getting paid for it, etc. You can just say file my expense report, it gets done, right? Because the system understands what all those steps are. And so if you're going to build a software company today, you are doing it for some workflow somewhere. You better use generative AI in a very meaningful way.
Yeah. So if you're an entrepreneur today, I think one is you cannot ignore AI. You know, to develop probably enough context and find what's relevant for you. But also, I think what you mentioned earlier, a thing to keep in mind is, I mean, today, you've seen 800 companies. I think we can all agree all those 800 companies will not make it. There's going to be probably some kind of, and in the computer science, we use AI winter. Right. So going to AI funding winter also. Correct. Probably going to happen next 2-3 years. But like your earlier example of, people have been building internet companies for 2 decades and longer, and probably the same thing will play out. So I think it's you embrace it now, start developing context, use it where you can, but also be patient. It's not definitely now or never situation.
Correct. I mean, don't be the person that when the iPhone moment happened, said, this BlackBerry is the best phone that was ever invented.
Keyboard. I will never move away from keyboard.
Exactly, right? You don't need the iPhone.
Right.
At the same time, if you're not the person who built one of the first 100 apps on the App Store, it's like, oh my God, the opportunities passed me by.
That's right, yeah. No. Excellent. No, this is super helpful, Deep. I think I just want to thank you for taking the time. I think you have, huge wealth of knowledge, not only in product management, venture investing, but general, leadership. I think you're doing great service to the field at large by sharing your knowledge and codifying it in various formats and speaking publicly about it. I'm just immensely thankful that you were able to take time. I've actually learned a lot from you over the last decade. continue to learn and look forward to every opportunity I can get to.
No, it's my pleasure and my privilege to be on your podcast and continue our long-standing relationship. I learned a lot from you as well, Mukesh, and all the amazing work that you do. So thank you for what you do as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Deep.
At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.